Okay, first thing I want to say is today is a very special day on the Chabad calendar, the Jewish calendar. It's the Rebbe's birthday, 125 years ago, starting 125th birthday, 1902.
Wow.
So it's considered a beautiful day. And um, every year, as a kid, I remember that we used to get ready for the Rebbe's birthday. We used to learn Mishnah by heart as a gift for the Rebbe. And every year, the Sunday, the Rebbe would give out dollars on Sunday. So the Sunday before the Rebbe's birthday, we would go get a dollar, but everybody wore a badge. All the kids wore a badge of how much Mishnah you studied Baal Peh by
Oh,
heart.
that's nice.
And then he would give it dollars. And I found yesterday, my mother sent me years ago, she actually has those badges and she
Right.
sent me a picture of it. So I was looking at it yesterday. It's pretty cool. And let's see if I can find it. Um, Either way, that's my memories. But it was always nice weather. It wasn't so cold. Yesterday it was freezing, so it didn't feel like the 11th of Nisan, but either way, okay. Here. So here you have your name and how many chapters you learned. And it was 1990, 1991.
Very nice.
Tractate, Brachos, Megillah, Sukkah. So this is the badge you wore. This was
Oh,
two separate
nice.
years. So that's when we were kids.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's
And if
it.
you wanted, you didn't have a badge, did you still get a
No,
dollar?
no. Everyone can get a dollar, but
Very
to
nice.
go with this group of kids
Right.
from the school, you had to learn at least one chapter by heart. So we were like 2 months we were preparing for the Rebbe's birthday. So that was just was beautiful. Okay, let's do a little bit of the Haggadah. And last week we spoke about some of the big themes, like what is the spiritual significance of Egypt and the Exodus and telling the story. So it was more big themes. Now we want to think about more specifics. And the problem with the Haggadah is that it's many pages. How many pages? Not that long, but it's this is almost the whole thing, and it's whatever, 8, 9 pages. So when you have this amount of pages, sometimes you can lose the big picture and the question of what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to accomplish. So we want to think about what is the essential point of what we're trying to achieve, and maybe what are the some of the messages behind those ideas. Okay. So we talked about the story. So I'm just going to be brief, very quickly repeat what I said last week about the story, that one of the biblical commandments is to say the story. So eating matzah is biblical, but saying the story is biblical. And we talked about the idea of a story is really the idea where, in a way, story represents the ability to be free, because if there's no story, then there's just simple things happening to me, or things happening to me, but I'm not in control of it because I cannot apply the interpretation and the meaning of the story, right? So let's say something happens that's challenging. So I could look at it as, okay, now I'm a victim of this event. Or I could say it's part of a larger story. And if it's part of a larger story, then it's here so that I can learn something from this and go on to the next chapter and grow from this. But there is a next chapter and there's a previous chapter, and it's part of an overarching theme that I'm supposed to move throughout. So in that case, it's not that I'm taking control of the events by giving my understanding and my meaning to what's happening, and even the challenge then could become an opportunity for growth. So I guess the modern psychologists would call it framing, right? Any event that happens, you could think of it as this is what happened, and this is an event that happened to me, or it's how I choose to think about it. And if I choose to think about it differently, if I choose to think about it as part of a story, then the meaning changes for me, and the same event that maybe before was a challenge now could be empowering. So that's in general the spiritual significance of a story. And we talked about this last week, that if you look at Torah, the Torah talks about Leman Tisaper, that the story of the Exodus, the God tells Moshe when they're still in Egypt, that the purpose is so when you go out of Egypt, you will tell the story. So the story is important. Okay, so that's something about the story. Um, the next thing we want to say is that we know that the story was designed the way the sages, the way the Torah, forget the sages, the way the Torah says to tell the story is in response to a question. Right? The Torah says, your son will ask you, what is all this about? And you will respond. So in other words, supposed to tell the story, but we have to tell the story in response to a question. Now, so that we have to talk about why that is significant, but that leads to a series of problems, which is what happens if you come to the table and you're a teacher and and you say, does anyone have any questions? And what happens? It's silent. So how are you going to tell the story in response to a question if there are no questions? So that's a very big problem. So the solution that the sages come up with is you have to do things that are strange. And there are things that we do at the Seder, and you say, why do we do it? And you know what the answer is? To get the kids to ask. There's no reason why we do it. Right? So for example, the idea that we dip, right in the beginning of the Seder, you dip a vegetable and then you take the food away. I mean, it's crazy. You ever went to dinner and they dipped the vegetable and they moved the table away? Today, nowadays, we don't. The ancient world, in the Roman times, in times of the Mishnah, people would actually, why is my bleeding? People would actually eat on little couches, and each person had their own table. And then it was more visible that they would literally move away the table. Right? Today, we don't eat that way. Everyone sits together at one table, so we move away the food, move away the matzah, or we cover the matzah. But the point is, we're doing things to make the kids ask. And that's the only reason why we do it. So that's a very interesting thing. You want to stop right here. What is that concept of in response to a question and why it has to be in response to a question? And we talked about this on Friday a little bit, and that is that education is not really top down. You can't tell somebody or a child or somebody else, you can't tell somebody, you can't educate by just superimposing your values or your opinion or the knowledge you have, because chances are you may give a speech, but the person may not even be listening, and certainly the person is not ready for internalization. And the way a person learns is when they are curious. If you don't have that element of curiosity, there's no way to learn. And in a way, the teacher's job is not to convey information, even though that's very important, but that's secondary. The teacher's job is to create the interest. People call it motivation, but it's really to create the interest. And step number one for education is creating interest. And interest is expressed with question. If someone asks a question, you know they're interested. If they're not interested, they're not asking a question. Now, they could be interested without asking a question, but it's very hard to ask a question if you're not interested, right? You have to at least have enough to engage and say, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? It's some level of input that the person asking is invested, is involved at a minimum. At least they're aware of what's happening, and they're able to identify that some things are strange and figure out this doesn't make sense to me. So how do I explain it to myself? That's already a level of involvement. So that's a very important point. The first thing is that education happens in response to interest, in response to a question. I guess as a parent, it happens a lot of times that the kids ask the question in the wrong times. Let's say it's bedtime and they start asking you all these questions that you don't have time because it's late. And you say, oh, just leave it alone. But all that you're telling them things, but they're not listening. But then when they ask a question, you have to realize this is an opportunity, because when they're asking the question, that's when they're listening. And that's something that the sages understood. It's the Torah, not to say the Torah understood intuitively, that the only way to be able to pass on the story to the next generation is it has to be something that they're interested in. And interest is expressed with a question. And if there are no questions, do things to provoke questions. And that's what the Seder is designed to do. So that's step number one. Even before we talk about what story we're telling, we're talking about the idea that we'd have to tell the story in response to a question to make sure that the people are listening. And the kids, because a lot of this is passing it on to the next generation, are engaged. And there's no way to superimpose that. It has to be organic, and it has to be coming from them. Now, you could engineer organic interest, right? But the goal is to get the the people listening, the audience has to want to understand. Go ahead, Dr. Tamron, please.
Rabbi, you posed a fascinating issue about education and questions. Isn't it reciprocal though? Doesn't the teacher or the parents have to ask questions as well? So that, because basically, if you stimulate the interest by you asking the question, so doesn't it really have to be reciprocal? And some of the best teachers teach by asking questions.
Yeah, so asking questions, if the teacher asks questions, that creates a culture of questions, and that teaches the kids how to ask questions, and that models the idea that questions is actually a good thing. And if you go to yeshiva, I always like to say that in yeshiva, if you ask a good question, that's what's celebrated. If you can ask a question on the Talmud that nobody else asked, that means you're a great scholar. Okay, if you can give an answer, anyone can give an answer, right? Answer is easier. In other words, an answer is because it's easier to ask a question, it's easier to give an answer, but ask a question to find some contradiction and something that no one else in the past 2,000 years of studying Talmud, no one came up with this question. If you can ask a good question, that's a sign of that's what's celebrated. That's a sign of scholarship. So you're right that you have to create you have to model the behavior you want. If you want questions, you have to model those questions. And you're right that some good teachers would begin the teaching or begin the lecture by asking questions. But the point is, by asking questions, the question you ask hopefully gets the audience to have that question. But I'm saying that itself is already later in the game. That's somebody who already paid tuition and already showed up and already motivated and already has their computer open and already wants to learn. And you have to catch their attention so you ask a question. But what about the kid who's busy playing in the sandbox? Right? In other words, I don't mean a kid. It could be a kid in age, but it could also be a person who's not interested in your subject matter. Right? So then asking a question is may not do it because they don't care. Why, how come this mathematical problem exists? I don't care. Right? So they have to ask the question. And if they ask the question, then they're at least open to hear what you say. And then hopefully you have an interesting answer. If you don't have an interesting answer, you may lose them. You also have to convey information. But the point is, you can't just convey information. The Torah understands I'm not saying you can't, but I'm saying the best way to convey information would be when the person is open to listen, at least. And when is that? When they have interest. And how do you see interest? Interest is curiosity, and that's related to questions. But your point is well taken that sometimes the best way to get questions is to model the concept of asking questions. Go ahead, Ben, please.
So this is kind of different than the Socratic method, and on the outside it looks like it, because in the Socratic method it's just the teacher asking questions, and then finding weak spots and gray areas, in the response,
Right.
and the teacher, it's not top down in that sense or on the outside, but in fact it is. There is a certain top down coming by asking questions. So it's
Right.
kind of an interesting, distinction how the Socratic method differs from, which is all about, asking questions from the teacher and the student usually doesn't answer questions back, or Socrates interlocutors, in my recollection, never asked questions back.
Right. So I would say that there is a value in the Socratic method, which is you have to also learn how to ask good questions, right? The value, in other words, the better questions you ask, the better information you'll get, or the more or the better conclusions you'll come to. So it's very important to learn how to ask a good question. But what I'm saying is that's already secondary. That's already someone coming to their teacher, coming to the master, and now wants to learn. So yes. So it's important so then the teacher will teach you how to ask a good question. But how do you get the student to want to show up to begin with?
Right.
It has to bother them. But I would say that in the Talmud, in the yeshiva, everybody asks questions. And like I said, better than a good answer is a good question. Because if you're asking a good question means that you're saying that something doesn't make sense to me. Well, that is a very powerful statement because it means that I'm thinking, right? In a way,
Right.
you think about some thinkers. How do I know that I'm thinking? How do I know that I'm understanding? Give me just a second. There's a writer on Chabad.org, Tzvi Freeman, who's an interesting philosopher, but he's like, how do I know that I'm actually thinking? I'm not just parroting. And he says, one of the ways I know is if I don't understand something. That means that it's not working. But that means that I'm thinking. So you're right that it's not just, so I'm saying the starting point is teaching kids. When I say kids, I mean kids in age, but it also means kids in this field, right? You could be a very wise person, but in this field, you don't know much. So if I don't know anything about it, I'm not interested because it's not interesting to me. But if you can get me to ask a question and create my curiosity, then it opens me up. So then I learn how to ask questions. But again, I hear other questions. Once I have my own question, I could hear other questions. But I'm saying, but what I'm saying is that throughout the journey, everyone's always asking questions.
It is true that Socrates stood in the square and people came to him, and so that right there and then, based upon like what you're saying, they already had the curiosity. They were seeking him out, or the law student, who's already in class and
Right.
being subjected, to the Socratic, questioning. But it's sort of interesting because a lot of times it's a dual back and forth of
Yes.
questions,
Yes.
rather than of answers,
Look
rather
at the
than
Talmud. The Talmud is all questions. I mean, you get an answer, but you get an answer after 5 pages of questions. And that's
yeah.
what you investigate. You keep asking it again and again and again. And you try to break the thing down. And then you're basically taking the concept apart. And that's how you get to the good conclusion. So the better your questions, yeah. So the value of questions and some people are very good at having exclamation points. They know everything and they know all the answers. And the wise people know how to ask good questions. And the question mark could be in some ways more valuable than the exclamation mark.
Hmm.
Go ahead, Seth. Go ahead.
The Socratic method,
Yeah.
I think, maybe you can help me. So it's how, if I ask a question about Passover,
Yeah.
but I frame it in a way that Rabbi Feldman would be curious, or then I changed it, and then I changed it the way Steve would be curious. I forgot your name.
Neil.
And then I would ask a different question. See, that's the end in mind, because I know they
Yes.
it would be more relevant
Yes.
to them.
Yes.
That's why there are so many questions. I'm not asking a question, I'm sort of saying something, but that's why there's so many questions in the Talmud.
Yes.
Because
Every person
not
has their
everyone
own.
will
Correct.
hit.
Correct.
but one may hit.
And different people have different types of questions. And that's the power of learning in a group.
So you got to get it. So if a child is playing in the playground,
Oh.
you may ask a question, how does Passover
Relate to them. And that's why we'll get to that in a second. The next step is that there are 4 sons, because the Torah is telling us there isn't one question, there isn't one child, there isn't one question. Everybody that you have to communicate, you have to intrigue every child in their level. But that's step number 2. That's the 4 sons. Even before we get to the 4 different sons, the concept that
Well, Socratic method starts at the end in mind,
right.
I think.
Yeah, and I think, but part of it, if you realize it's not top down, is that the person has to ask. Then you realize that you have to talk. You have to, like, number one rule of public speaking is know your audience. Then you have to know the audience. Who is the child I'm trying to communicate with? What are they motivated by? What are they curious by? And then understand that you may do different things to provoke those questions. And even if you don't know, but they're going to ask you different questions. So the most interesting thing is about the Haggadah is that the way the Torah tells you the story is the answer is also different, because it's not the same answer. It's the same story, same thing happened, but the way you're going to present the answer is not the same answer, because different people are motivated by different things. And for one child, you can get detailed, and for some child, don't care about details; they just care about the big idea.
So the fourth child in the 4 children who doesn't know what to ask,
That's the
You
most
know,
challenging. That's the
it-
most
it-
challenging.
but he's at the table. You
He's
know,
at the table. Yeah.
what you're saying is, how do I get them to the table? But the fact that the fourth child is there
Yeah.
and you're trying to engage.
But
you know,
what does the answer say in the fourth child that says at patachlo, you open his mouth, which is understood to mean you do whatever you could to open their mouth to get them to ask a question. So that's the
Right.
most challenging. The most challenging when the kid asks a question is not so you have to find the answer. Okay, so ask ChatGPT. No, I'm kidding. When the kid asks a question, so you go find out the answer. But to get the kid to ask the question, that's the most challenging one. And the fourth is the most challenging. But the Torah says, At patachlo, you open his mouth. Well, how could you open someone's mouth? Come with a wrench and open the mouth? No, it means do things to provoke them, to interest them. And you're right, that's the most difficult one. Go ahead, Neil.
I was just going to just segue that one of the most important things I'm trying to teach
Yeah.
now as a computer science teacher is to get my kids to ask the right questions of ChatGPT
Yes.
and to ask the set of questions
Yes.
so that you actually get to where you need to go.
Yes.
And teaching people how to ask
Yes.
questions,
That's
how to
very-
prompt it is actually a new field that's
Yes.
emerging.
Yes, that's a very good point. My brother tells me all about this. He lives in Iceland, so he has to keep his kids busy because he does part of the day homeschooling, and they want to make coloring sheets. They're very young girls. They want to make coloring sheets. So it used to be they used to say, Dad, find me coloring sheets." So he has to spend 10 minutes finding coloring sheets, and this they don't want, and this they do want. So now he says, no, no, no. You want coloring sheets? Okay, here's the computer. Here's ChatGPT. Tell it exactly what you want the coloring sheet to look like. So first of all, he saves himself time. But more importantly, he gives them the skill of prompting. And this is the future. The future is, could you ask the right question? This is 100% the future. It's also the past because we've been doing it for 3,000 years. So maybe we have an edge, but it's also the future.
So what do you say to the child who doesn't know how to ask the question?
Oh, very good that we have that. That's a good question.
Why
Seth,
don't you understand?
That's the good question. That's the good question. That's the question. That is the number one question. You're coming to the Seder. What should I eat? What should I serve? The real question is, how do I get my child to ask a question? That's the right question.
But so the particular question is, what would be the particular?
Every
question?
child is different, and you have to do things and say things in a way that will get them to ask a question.
Well, can you ask them, what don't you understand?
For some children that will work. For some children that will work. For some children it won't. Right? But that's the right, and the Torah only gives you 4 examples, 4 children, but there's really many more. There are hundreds of thousands of children. But when you say 4, you mean you're getting all the categories. There's general categories. There's some kids that's a Russia, which is disinterested. Okay, we'll get to the details later. Disinterested, doesn't feel connected, not apathetic, curious about details, and just interested in the big picture. That's basically your categories. In your classroom, those are going to be your 4 categories. Now, within each category, there are many, many shades. Okay, go ahead, Vicky. It's an excellent class, by the way, because I had all these things. I have 12 pages of notes. But my whole point is that it's not about frontal teaching. It's about asking the questions. So the more questions, the more you're proving my point. So that's good. Go ahead, Vicky.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. I think I had this question maybe like 20 minutes ago. How do we get the children asking questions if the questions are predefined and so are the answers, and the things that they're designed to provoke the questions they did last year and maybe remember? So I was just wondering.
That's a good question. That's a good question. So the model is we ask Manishtana 4 questions, but that's just because you have to give a text and you have to say there are 4 questions. But the point is these are the 4 questions as a starting point. The point is that this is teaching you, and by the way, in Talmudic times, you didn't need these 4 questions or any 4 questions. The point was just to ask questions. And over the years, these 4 were formalized, but sometimes there were 5, sometimes there were 3. You see what I'm saying? You have to print a book. You have to create a model. So the model is get the kids to ask questions. What should they ask about? Why this night is different? But if your kids just ask this and do not ask any other question, that's a problem. Now, I would say they don't have to necessarily ask the question tonight, because tonight they're tired and tonight they have to eat the matzah and tonight. But if a full year passed and your only questions your kid asked you were these 4 questions, that's not good. In other words, this is the model of create an environment where your kids want to ask and where questions are rewarded, not necessarily with, I don't mean when they say buy a truck every time they make a question, but when you make a question, you say, that's a compliment. That is a very good question. And like I said, in the culture we grew up in, from very young, from the first grade to post college, the question is celebrated. A good question, if you have a question and you get someone to grapple with the question and say, I don't understand, how come Rashi didn't ask this question? How come Tosafot didn't ask the question? How come the Code of Law didn't ask the question? It's a good question. That's a good question. That's what's celebrated, and that's the what do they call it? They call it the cultural currency. That's what people respect. Wow, this guy asked a good question.
Can't you ask child?
Do you?
One second, Vicky. 1 second. Go ahead, Seth.
Can't you ask the child, why don't they have a question? What can I do to ask?
For some children,
to ask?
the answer is yes. The answer is yes. For some children, that could work. For some, I don't think there's one answer. The whole point is that for some children that would work. But if it's not working, then what's your backup? What's your next?
The answer is it depends. It depends.
Yeah.
It depends on the child.
Yeah. Okay, Vicky, go ahead. Finish up your point. Then we get Dr. Tamarins next. You get a follow-up.
Well, yeah, actually, that relates to the same question I asked before. I was just wondering if you have any examples of how to get the child interested in asking the right question from your experience.
My experience, I'm not very good at getting my kids to ask questions, but I'm learned, and I think that I'm sensitive to stopping. When a kid asks a question, I stop everything and I say, "This is your moment." That's what like I said, I don't know that I'm so good at cultivating questions. But I was saying, if you want personal, because no one's listening to it. It's only being recorded and being placed on YouTube. but maybe the AI models are gonna scrap this up and learn from me, learn about me. But I'll say I'm not great. I don't think I'm great at getting my kids to ask questions. I think questions come up, but I would say I think that I when my kid, it could be late at night, I could be tired. Someone asks a question. I'll stop what I'm doing, even if I'm doing something else that's important. My antennas go up. I think I'm sensitive to this. And I say, this is your moment. This is when they're listening. You could plan to speak for 13 years. They're not, this is your moment. So treat it seriously. And sometimes they ask questions at the most inconvenient times because that's when they're curious. But when are they curious? Not when I'm curious. Not when I want to give my lecture. I give my lecture all day, but they're not listening. It's the old joke. It's the old joke. I don't know why I'm saying it. The guy's speeding at 2:00 in the morning and he gets pulled over by the cop. And the cop says, it's 2:00 in the morning. Where are you speeding? He says, I'm speeding to the lecture. He says, the lecture at 2:00? Who's giving a lecture at 2:00? He says, my wife.
I love it.
That's excellent.
So the point is that you have I'm ready to give my lecture, but that chances are they're not even listening. But when someone asks a question, that's when they're listening. That's when, even if it's inconvenient time, that's the plan you want to listen. Go ahead, Dr. Tamron. You've been waiting so
Well,
patiently.
first of all, Rabbi, you're selling yourself short. Look at how many questions you stimulate every time we study with you.
The massive success.
You're
This is the massive
you're
success.
masterful at stimulating questions.
Okay.
But here's something that will interest you. You stimulate me to go into other areas and ask questions. So the question I asked myself was this: if someone has attention deficit disorder, and probably maybe even 10% of the population has it, and I see it often. And if you treat a patient with a stimulant, which is the treatment for attention deficit disorder, I asked ChatGPT while you were there, do they ask more questions? What do you think the answer was? If you treat someone with attention deficit disorder with a stimulant and they respond, do they ask more questions? Yes or no?
I don't know, because
The answer is yes.
Yeah, I would say that so what you're saying is that attention is synonymous with questions.
Yes.
Yeah. I just didn't know how the medication works. So whether it suppresses
Yes, no,
yeah.
the medication, the medication is intended to improve attention.
Okay, so attention is synonymous with questions. I get that. That
Right.
makes sense to me. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Go ahead, Ben, and then we'll try to make
Yeah,
make
let's go
some
with the first
progress. Yeah.
But
One last question.
Yeah, the question is that questions are meant to ultimately get someone to free will. And so the student, so yes, you can stimulate the question, but and I've seen this, that, people get to the point where they're always going to answer the question, but it's sort of like a gotcha kind of thing. And let me see what I can get to. But where you want that question to go? Curiosity, yes, but curiosity for what purpose?
So
In other words,
that's a good point. That's a good point. So, and part of this is alluded to if you read the Four Sons, it's actually interesting because part of this is alluded to in the four questions. I'm just going to say, so obviously we know. I mean, obviously we know that some questions are not really questions; they're really statements. In other words, some questions is when a person asks a question like it's really expressing what they feel and what their philosophy is, and they're not open to hear your answer. So part of asking the question, part of teaching someone how to ask a question is differentiate between what is a question, what is an attack, right? You come home and someone says, why did you do that? Are they curious or are they attacking me, right? And sometimes they're curious and I take it as an attack. And sometimes it's an attack and I don't realize, but I'm just saying, so it's very subtle. It's very subtle. What is a question? And what's the proper way to ask a question is very subtle. But you're right. Part of teaching someone how to ask a question is realizing that question means you have to, if you're really asking a question, I mean, and you're asking me a question, that means you have to be willing to listen to what I have to say. Meaning question means I'm giving you the attention. I'm giving you my attention. I'm giving you the opportunity to give me your perspective. And not every question is like that. A lot of questions is like either an attack or rejection. And that's what we're going to talk about the wicked son. The wicked son is basically disinterested. And the questions are just they're not really questions. They're statements in disguise as questions. And
it's true. People will oftentimes say, no, I'm really genuinely interested. I'm not, it's not, they'll qualify it. I'm I really am asking. Tucker
Right.
Carlson will say
Yeah.
that. We'll go, oh, I'm just asking. No, you're not. You're an asshole. Kind of thing. Oh, I'm on
And I say,
Zoom. Sorry.
what were you? Why did you do that? What were you thinking? That's not a
Yeah.
question.
Right.
That's not a question. That's some tech. Okay, so I want to say something about the four questions, a little bit about the four questions, about the four sons, and then I want to get to a little, maybe a little bit of the answer. Maybe that's a little too ambitious, but we'll see.
One question.
Yeah. This is an amazing class. This is like a major success. Go
What if
ahead.
you have daughters and not sons?
So banim doesn't mean daughter. So the answer is if you don't have but banim is in biblical Hebrew, sometimes the masculine is for both. So a daughter is it means children. And the Talmud continues and says someone has no children, then your wife should ask you the question. And if you don't have a wife and you're sitting in Seder alone, ask yourself the question. In other words, we understand.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we understand that even yourself, you have to interest yourself. You have to interest yourself. So what doesn't make sense to me? I'm doing this for 60 years, 70 years, 100 years. What is strange? But again, like I said earlier from Tzvi Freeman, if everything makes sense, I don't know that I'm thinking. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But if something rubs me the wrong way, that means I'm thinking. So the answer to your question is that banim doesn't mean sons. Doesn't mean sons. It's translate. You have to translate it. Banim means children. Now it could be Ben could be a son, but it doesn't have to be a son. And in this context, where we're talking about general, there's four sons, or many more than four sons. But so obviously we're talking about general. Okay, I just want to say something about the four sons and where this comes from. In the Haggadah, it's going to be, if you want to look at on this page, it's going to be the bottom of page 398, the first page, I guess. Blessed is the omnipresent one. Blessed is he who gave Torah to his people Israel. Blessed be he. The Torah speaks of four children. One is wise, one is wicked, one is simple, and one does not know how to ask. That's top of page 399. Now, these translations are imperfect because wicked is not a perfect translation. It translates as wicked, but we have to see the context. In this context, we'll get to that later. What I want to say is like this: what is this business? What does it mean four sons? What does it mean the Torah spoke about four sons? You look at the Torah, it doesn't say wise, wicked, simpleton, and one who doesn't know how to ask. You don't see that. What do you see in the Torah? There are four times where the Torah says that you're going to tell the story of the Exodus to your children. At four different times, twice in Exodus and twice in Deuteronomy. And I may be making a mistake. Maybe three times in Exodus, once in Deuteronomy. I don't remember offhand. We'll see right here. Deuteronomy, Exodus. Okay, once in Deuteronomy, three times in Exodus. What's interesting is the way the Torah tells the story is every time you say, why does the Torah have to say it four times? It's ridiculous. The Torah is supposed to be careful with its words. It doesn't usually say extra things. And over here, you have no less than four times that the Torah tells you tell the story to your child. And the rabbi is looking a little carefully, and they have this question, like why the repetition? And they come with a realization. What is the realization? The realization is that it's not this. First of all, it's not the same story, and second of all, not the same question. Each time when the Torah says your child will ask you, and you will answer every single time, what your child will ask you is different, and what you answer is different. And in fact, of the four times, three of them, it says, Ki yishalcha bincha, your child will ask you. And the first time, it doesn't even say your child will ask you. It just says, V'iganta lebincha, tell your child. So the rabbis say, 1 second, if the question is different and the answer is different, and one of the times we don't even have a question, what is the Torah telling you? The Torah is telling you that there are four categories of questions, or lack thereof. But the point is, there's going to be four different categories of children. And understand that just because you have two kids in the same gene pool and they're sitting next to each other and they grew up in the same room and they're in the same household and they eat the same dinner, they don't have the same questions. And the way they ask a question is different, and the way to stimulate them is different. And maybe most importantly, surprising, is your response to them is going to be different. And that's where we get to the four sons. And then we can get to the specifics if you want to go there, you want to go to the answer. That's the next step. But just to understand where this comes from, where do we pull this out of the hat? So the Torah, three times in Exodus, once in Deuteronomy, says, your child will ask you and you will respond. And the question is different. And the answer is different. So now we have to look at their word. If we had time, we can go into their words and say, why does this child speak in this language? And this child speaks in that language? Because it's telling you something about the way about their state of mind. And in a way, this is a broader point, which is the way you express what you feel with your words. So you look at the question and you learn something about the person from the question, but that's already a separate point. Go ahead, Seth.
repetition.
Yeah.
Some people can jump right in on the first shot.
Yeah.
Some people need to get more comfortable with the information.
Yeah.
So the repetition allows on the fourth shot,
Yeah.
maybe somebody who now they feel comfortable. They say, "Oh, I understand. I've heard it all this time.
Yeah.
Now I can ask a question."
Right. Right.
Some people are.
That's a good point. That's a good point. But I would say
slower than others.
that's a good point. Repetition is very powerful, but it's interesting that in the Torah, even when the Torah repeats, and this is a broader rule, a broader point, even when the Torah repeats, and on the surface it seems like it's repeating, never the exact same story. There's always in other words, every time you hear a story, you learn something new, and you hear a different perspective.
But that may hit that child, or
Correct.
that
Correct.
person at that time.
Correct.
That's relevant.
Correct. Go ahead, Dr. Tamarin, please.
Rob, I thought you'd enjoy this because this I took off the computer. It said,
good.
while a good answer is nice, it's often temporary and specific to the moment. A good question, however, is a gift that keeps giving, driving curiosity and new knowledge forward. So there you go.
That's very good. And I think Daniel's point is true that the future is to be able to ask the right questions. More than a specific question, it's the attitude and the culture. The culture that will celebrate a question and knows how to read the text or look at a problem.
Just modify that.
Yeah.
To ask a series of good
A
questions.
series, right. It's not one. That's a good point.
Which is,
That's good.
you're refining it
Yeah.
and refining it.
And by the way, that's Talmudic. Because Talmudic, you can ask a question and then we give an answer and then we refine. And you can have 3.5 pages. You could spend literally a week on refining a question.
Because that's what I'm trying
Follow
to
up.
teach now.
Yeah, that's what you need because the first question is going to be general, right? The first question you ask, that's a good point. So it's also a series of questions. That's good. And part of the Talmudic problem to study Talmud for people who are not trained, I think that's not trained in Talmud. I think that's the hardest point. The point is like the series that you have to keep track of the whole series, right? That's the difficult part. But I think that's a skill that's going to become more relevant for the people of the future who are going to be dealing with AI.
Tracking system.
Yeah, but we're talking about in your head, how to help it give us information and keep refining and keep growing and keep moving it forward.
Because that's the way to really utilize AI.
Yeah. Yeah.
L-
Because
Learn to prompt, not learn to code anymore. Learn to prompt. I
Right.
trademarked this months ago,
Oh, good.
and I do it a lot with AI.
That's good. But I think Neil is telling us also, in addition to prompting, you understand that prompting is not one prompt. You can't say, I got a good prompt, I go home and go to sleep.
Oh no, it's a
Yeah.
series of
Yeah.
prompting.
Yeah. Yeah.
100%. No. It's a process, but just like in Talmudic times, just
Yes.
with AI, but the same principle.
Right. Agreed. Very good. Okay. So now we did the 4 sons. I don't know if you want to go specifically. Do we want to go into it? Okay. We want to get into it. Neil wants to get into it.
And I really want you to explain the wicked son.
The wicked son. Okay, so we'll go specific we'll do 6-7 minutes on the specific. Maybe I'll do 2 minutes on the answers. So I have it's not a great text. It's not perfect here on the screen. I couldn't find a better version, but okay, we're going to read a little bit of the sons and then we'll see the difference. So here's Hebrew English, the wicked one. So I want to read 2 paragraphs. I want to read the wise one and then I'll read the wicked one. Remember that the Torah doesn't call it wise. The Torah just says, your son will ask. And from the question of the answer, you see he's a wise son.
Why do you call them wise?
Because you have to categorize it. We have to categorize. So we call it wise. We'll see what wise means in this context. Then you can ask, why do we call him wicked? That's also an interesting question. What is he wicked? He's a bank robber. What does wicked mean in this context? And what we say to the wicked son is also very off-putting, not very loving. We say basically, get out of here, punch out his teeth and get out of here. So we have to deal with this. So I think you cannot understand the first or the second without each other. The first 2 go together. Because if you think about it, one of the reasons why the wise is next to the wicked is because both the wicked and wise are what they have in common is they're both very smart. So you want to understand it too. You have to look at them as a whole, I think. Okay, so I'm reading as follows. I'm reading on here. It's on page 399 on the top, the wise one, and I'm reading it on the screen. The wise one, what does he say? What are the testimonies, the statutes, and the laws which God, your God, has commanded you? You in turn shall instruct him in the laws of Pesach. Up to 1 is not to eat any dessert after the Paschal lamb. We understand that to mean teach them all the laws, all the details, including the last one. What's the last law of the Seder? The last law of the Seder is about the Afikoman, that you eat the Paschal lamb for dessert. Today we don't. We eat the matzah instead, but you eat the Passover lamb for dessert, and after that you don't eat anything else. Okay, fine. Let's go to the next paragraph. Russia. This is the most hard to understand. The wicked one. What does he say? What is this service to you? And now why is it so wicked? So I would say that,
He's asking that question.
yeah, the wicked one. The Torah says the kid will ask you, what is the service to you?
Because it's excluding himself.
Oh, so the Torah doesn't say he's wicked. We are classifying that question is a wicked question. Well, what does wicked mean? So in this context, so Neil is right. That the Haggadah says the rabbis are saying,
It's actually a good question.
one sec. Yeah, hold on a second. He says to you, but not to him. By thus excluding himself from the community, he has denied that which is fundamental. That's that. In other words, we're saying this is the problem. What makes him wicked is he excludes himself from the community. And what's the problem with that? He denies what is fundamental. We'll try to talk about that. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but let's see. What is the response? Now, it's interesting. The Torah gives a response what to tell him, which looks very similar to the other responses. But the Haggadah doesn't make that response. The Haggadah drops the response of the Torah and makes its own commentary, which is very, very strange because it breaks the model of the other ones. You therefore blunt his teeth, whatever that means. I don't know if that means punch him in the teeth. I don't know. And say to him, it is because of this that God acted for me when I left Egypt. That's a quote from the Bible. Because of this, God did for me when I left Egypt. But the way we're reading it in this context, we tell the wicked child, for me, but not for him. If he had been there, he would not have been redeemed, which is basically the worst thing you could tell somebody. So why are we telling this to them? This is
an educational moment.
This is the educational moment. Why are we doing? What are you doing? What are you telling the kid? You're saying, oh, you said, what is this? You excluded yourself. So you know what? You're not part of the family. You know what? If you were in Egypt, you wouldn't have came. So this is very strange. So we want to deal with this for a second, but before that, I want to talk about the word wicked for 1 second. And in this context, wicked. What does wicked mean? I don't even know what wicked means. Period. But what does it mean? I'm saying the etymology of Russia. But in this context, wicked means. In this context, wicked means I'm not part of the family. What are we doing here? We're sitting at a Seder as a family, and we're telling the family history, right? Some kids is not interested. Any Elisha is not interested. And some kid is simple. Just tell me where we come from. I don't care about the details. And some kid says, I don't feel part of this family. And excluding himself. That, in this context of sitting around the table, that's the problem. Wicked is just a word. But what it's saying is your biggest challenge is not that he has this question or that question. He's not sure if he wants to respect his grandmother. That's not the biggest problem. What's the biggest problem? What's the biggest educational challenge for this child? Is that he actively doesn't want to be part of this group. And now we have to deal with it. But that's the real challenge. When someone's not interested, in a way, it's worse. We'll talk about that in a second. In a way, the apathy is worse. The guy comes and says, I'm coming to this Thanksgiving dinner, coming to this pastor, say, I don't want to be here. I don't feel myself as part of this family. I don't see myself as part of this culture. This is where I stand, and I'm excluding myself. This is your greatest educational challenge. Now, oftentimes those people the kid is not stupid. He's very smart. So you put him next to the Chacham. He's very wise. And then we figure out how to communicate with them. That's a separate problem. It doesn't seem like this is going to be very effective, certainly not in the modern age. But we realize, we identify and say, when the sages are reading the Torah and the kid asks, Ma avodah zestachem, what is the service to you, excluding himself? We say, you're listening to the question. This is a threat. I don't mean a threat to the unity of the family. It's a threat of this child actively feeling, now he doesn't care is a separate problem, maybe bigger problem, but feels animosity, feels actively disengaged and actively separate from this group. That is what wicked means in this context. And then we figure out, how do we counter that? And that's a separate question. But realize that in a way, that's a big threat. It's not. I'm not going to say it's the biggest threat, because that's subjective. Some people would say the fourth is the biggest threat. And the Rebbe always said, Ben alluded to this, that these are all by the table. The Rebbe would say that there's a fifth child who doesn't come to the Passover Seder, and it's our job to go and get the child and go speak to the fifth child. So that may be a bigger threat, the ignorance or the apathy But there is a problem when someone says, I'm coming to your Passover Seder, everything you're teaching me, it's a wonderful story, it's very good for you. It's not my story. I don't care about this. I'm separating myself from this. This is wicked in this context. This is the threat to the whole story, to the continuity of the Jewish people. And and we have to find a way to engage.
What are the strategies for doing
What are the strategies? I still have 5 minutes. Okay. I just need 60 seconds. So the strategy, not very generally speaking, of course, everyone, you have to tailor different specifically, but I'm going to give what the Haggadah says and explain what it's trying to do, because it's very misleading what it says here, but hopefully you'll see that that's what it's trying to do.
One quick question.
Yeah.
Can we translate Russia as skeptical?
You could, yeah, in this context, yes. In other words, real word Russia in the dictionary means wicked, but I would say skeptical is not enough, because skeptical is, I'm not sure if I'm buying in. That's midpoint between wise and wicked. Wicked, I don't want to use the word wicked. I'll use the word Russia because it's easier. Wicked is already skeptical is I'm not sure. This person already has it. I'm not, it's not my story. Or in the modern context, there's a person who says, let's say, for example, let's say want to say connection to Israel. So you say, I have critique of Israel. That's okay. If someone says, it's not my people, I'm against it, I'm anti-Israel, right? So in other words, you're getting to the point where skeptical is not, I don't think it's skeptical, because skeptical is I'm in between. I'm not sure, I didn't make my decision. The Russia made his decision. He's saying, I'm out. Now that's your biggest problem. That's your biggest challenge. Go ahead.
So can I also ask, since it's banim, which means it's children, right?
Yeah.
And we all know that children sometimes say stupid things that they don't mean.
Right.
Can we go with that?
Maybe. So that's the answer. But what he's saying is a threat. What he's saying is, if he really means this, he's saying is, I'm not connected to the story.
No, he's not.
That's
But
what
he's
he's
at the
saying.
table, so
He's
it's
not
contradicting.
saying that. You know what he's saying?
What is he saying?
He's saying, I feel separate. I want to be a part of. What does this mean to you? And explain it to me. And maybe it'll mean something to me because I feel separate. And also, it's a little bit of a scare tactic because it's saying, which he wants, I will be protected by my family.
Okay, so
So it's really not.
it's possible that there are children who are saying it for the shock effect. And I agree.
They want to be brought in.
It's very
There's no way-
possible, very possible. But so each one of these is a spec.
Because that's their.
Each one of-
we've labeled.
I got it. You're making an excellent point. But all I'm saying is each one of these is a spectrum. You agree with me that at the extreme of the spectrum, there could be a kid that really doesn't feel part of the story and really wants out.
If he asks
Now-
that question, he doesn't feel part of the story.
So some kids are not, but some kids are. So I'm just saying there's a spectrum. I'm not disagreeing with you. Sometimes you're saying a very good truth. You're saying sometimes when a kid says, I don't care, it doesn't mean they don't care.
They want
And
to be brought in.
when someone comes and tells you you're the worst parent who ever existed, they don't always mean it. I agree with you. That's a very good point. That's a very good point.
He means it.
He means, but not when he says, I'm not part of this family. He means to say, please make me part of this family.
Right.
But I agree. And very often that's the case. But at the extreme, there could be someone, not a child, an adult, because a child is and says, I don't want to be part of the Jewish people. This is not my future. This is not, I want to break away. And that's at the extreme. And you know what? A lot of people have broken away in the past 3,000 years. Some people said, pack their bags and we're out of here. It's not our story. And so not everybody, but I'm just saying, remember, it's not you're right. You're saying something very true, that very often when a person says that, he's just calling out for inclusion.
He's
And
at the table.
you're right. I'm not disagreeing. You're making an excellent point. No, you're making an excellent point.
Writing.
Part of this is, listen to what they're saying. We talked about this when we had the JLI about the responsa. Sometimes when there's a question, there's a deeper question. That's not what they don't necessarily saying what they mean they're saying. So but that's a great point. Okay, Ben, you have 30 seconds, and then have to reserve.
80% of the people were perished. Were so assimilated they didn't leave Egypt. In the story,
Right.
that
Quite-
so many, because of darkness, because they, is that the wicked child also in some ways? I mean, they're the ones. They're the ones who
Yes.
weren't reached, and
Yes.
they didn't become a part of us.
Yes. So I would just say the number 80 is one opinion. It's one opinion of the Midrash. It's not the only opinion. It's one opinion of the Midrash.
Okay,
But clearly,
yeah.
but clearly there are people who didn't want to come out, and excuse me, and that's our biggest challenge. The people who say this is not my story. You have a wonderful story. It's very nice, very nice. I like your story. It's going to go back a long time, but it's not my story. I have a different story. So that's a big that is a big threat. I'm not going to say the biggest threat because there may be bigger threats. Apathy, ignorance may be bigger threats. In a way, in a way, this child is almost like angry and provocative means in a way what Seth is saying is he really does care.
You gotta scare them.
Seth is saying he cares. Seth is saying he cares. And the child who's not interested, maybe that's your biggest problem. So that's a very good, right? So in a way, you read this and you want to say, is this some order? If you're saying that it was organized in order, maybe if the chacham if the wise is the greatest level, then the one who doesn't know how to ask is the worst. The wicked is not the worst. That's also interesting, but that's a separate point. That's already details. What are we telling this child? That's what Neil wants to know. And it's not just this child, it's maybe the generation of children, or maybe the broader point. So I'm going to start with the Hasidic answer and then try to explain maybe what the deeper point is and what we're trying to say. The Hasidic answer, obviously the Hasidic answer is all about seeing the good in everybody and inclusion. So they have a very big problem with reading this verse saying that we tell him, God did it for me and not for you. And if you were there, you would be excluded. You would not be redeemed. Like, what are you trying to do? So the Hasidic answer always has a twist, and we're going to read the twist, and then I'm going to try to say what's really happening here. And I think Seth will be happy. I'm not sure, but I think. Okay. We'll be super happy. Okay. When you read this, and this is distracting because this is meant to be provocative. Just like he's being provocative, Seth was right. Seth says you're also being provocative in your answer. But what are you saying? Because you have to shock them into listening. Also words that Seth used. You therefore blunt his teeth and say to him, it is because of this that God acted for me when I left Egypt. For me, but not for him. If he had been there, he would not have been redeemed. Is that a true statement? Yes. If he would have been in Egypt, he would not have been redeemed. And that's what Ben said. Some people didn't want to leave Egypt. They were not redeemed. But what are we really saying? And this is the Hasidic idea. The Hasidic idea is that was in Egypt. If you were in Egypt, you would not have been redeemed. But after Egypt, once we got the Torah at Sinai, there's no way you can break out of this family bond. So if you were there, oh, you want to leave? Yeah, if you were in Egypt, you wouldn't have to be part of the family. But post-Egypt, once you got the Torah, and when God makes the covenant with you and with every Jew, there's nothing you could do. You say, I'm not a Jew. You can't get out of it. So
that's interesting.
What we're saying so essentially what we're saying is, so that's the Hasidic spin. But what am I really saying? What I'm really saying is as follows. The person comes and tells you, I'm not part of this family. I'm not part of this family. What's the answer? What are you going to tell them? We have good gefilte fish. You should be Jewish because the gefilte fish is good because what are you going to tell them? You can't really the only thing I'm not going to say the only thing. The most important thing you could tell them is that from our perspective and from God's perspective, you can't get out because this is who you are. And we're always going to embrace you because even though you're saying, I'm trying to be provocative, I'm not here. I'm not part of you. It's you. It's not me. What do we say? We say, from our perspective, you're always in. There's nothing you can do about it. But the way we say that is we say, okay, if you were in Egypt, you couldn't leave. We don't need you. If you were in Egypt, you wouldn't be redeemed. We're also speaking in provocative terms to shake the person and say, wow, my father doesn't care about me. But you're just getting him to listen. But what you're really saying is, yeah, in Egypt, you wouldn't be redeemed. But now you're redeemed. Now you're stuck. Now, so a kid comes up and says, you're the worst family. You're the worst parent. I don't want to be part of your family. I'm out of here. What are you going to say? You're going to say you're always part of the family. From our perspective, you're always part of the family. There's nothing else you can do. You could do other things. You could say other things, and the Torah gives you other answers to say, but that's secondary over the feeling that you're giving. And what's the feeling that you're giving? From our perspective, you're always part of the group. And from God's perspective, you're always part of the truth. And objectively speaking, because we think God is the objective perspective, that you may feel that I'm not part of the group, but from God's perspective, you're always part of the group. And that, I think, is the most important thing you can say.
So if you didn't make it to Sinai, then you're not part of the group.
Get out. Right.
And how does and can you tie that into the patriarchs, and all?
Yeah.
Obviously,
patriarchs, because you think about this, who was Jewish in the patriarchs? You say the patriarchs, did they marry? Were they Jewish? Were their spouses Jewish? You had the tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes, Jacob's sons. Were they Jewish? Were their spouses Jewish? Did they have to keep the Torah? They did not have to keep the Torah. So before the Torah was given, it was basically a club. If you wanted to live the culture, if you wanted to follow the rules, you joined the club. And if you joined the club and you follow the rules, that's what makes you a part of this covenant. That's what makes you part of this family. And you can get in and you can get out. And Esav wants to be out, so he's out. Yishmael wants to be out, he's out. If they want to stay in, they could stay in. If they want to be out, they can be out. It's basically very much a product of the lifestyle you're choosing. But when it comes to Sinai, it's no longer lifestyle. It's not what it is. It becomes identity. It becomes identity. It's a covenant. And covenant, unlike in the modern thing, covenant is much more like contract. In biblical terms, covenant means these things don't break. This is unconditional. When it comes to Sinai, there's unconditional. So you could scream from the rooftops, I don't want to be part of this. It's not up to you. And we see historically that sometimes our enemies also know this, right? Also, our enemies go after the Jews, even the people who say we don't want to be Jewish and we don't consider ourselves Jewish and we consider ourselves very assimilated, but not always do the enemies buy that. And in a way, that is a truth that our enemies sometimes could perceive, that the connection that a Jew has with his peoplehood is not conditional. It's unconditional. It doesn't matter what the lifestyle choice they make. So I think the most powerful thing you're going to tell your child is, from our perspective, we're one. You cannot break this bond. You could want to break the bond. You could consider yourself breaking the bond. You consider yourself not Jewish. You can do whatever you want. But from our perspective and from God's perspective, I apologize, but there's no way out. You're stuck. And basically conveying the unconditional aspect of your spiritual identity. And that's the foundation. Anything else you'll say will have to be above that. Because if you don't have that idea, then the wicked child, then you're not going to communicate. You're not going to get through to them, because the point is the unconditional connection. Go ahead, Doc.
That's profound.
Rabbi, question. How do you square this with the fact that maybe I've got the facts wrong, that in times past and maybe still present, when a person would marry out of the faith, sometimes the parents would say Kaddish as if the person was dead. Now, how do you square that, which was certainly not in Reform or conservative Judaism, but in certain aspects of Orthodox Judaism? Is it not true that such parents would say Kaddish as if the person was dead? They were no longer part of us?
It is very true that people felt very hurt when their children abandoned their lifestyle choices and did things that were inconsistent with what the parents valued as the right thing to do. And it's very true that parents and children often are, in this context, but in all contexts, sometimes there's parents and children don't get along, and in the extreme cases, what's the word I'm looking for? Parents and children are what do they call it?
Estranged.
Estranged. So it's very common, but that is only on a behavioral level. If you get to the core, could a parent and a child sever their tie? Impossible. Certainly from a parent to a child.
So even when the parent says Kaddish and says you're dead, they're not dead.
They're not dead. They say they're dead, but that doesn't mean anything. Just like when I say I'm estranged from my child, and I may be estranged, but if you go deeper, do you care about your child? It's impossible for a parent not to care about the child.
But the Jewish line stops, and that's where the Kaddish is being said.
That's a different story. Jewish line, whether or not the children, so there's a mechanism how the children, whether they could pass it on to the next generation. But this child of yours, this child that is Jewish, if you were born Jewish or you converted to Judaism based on the Torah, and you're in, you cannot reverse that. It's not a reversible thing. It's not about you're in because you have, it's not conditional. It becomes unconditional. And that's the point. And then maybe whether or not I can convey it to my children is a different story. But me, because it's not, there's two parties to it, to being parents. So maybe I can't convey that because it follows the mother. But the point is that once the bond is created, if there's no going back, once you're Jewish, either by birth or by conversion, according to halacha, there's no mechanism to reverse that from God's perspective and from the parents' perspective. And yes, people don't talk to their children, are estranged from their children, all wonderful, but that's on a more of a superficial level. When you get to a core level, it's impossible. It's impossible to get to the point where I don't care about my kids. It's impossible. Yeah.
Isn't really they're saying we're dead.
Right.
They're saying
I'm in pain. Right.
I'm lost, and I'm not with you.
Right. That's a good point. That's a good point.
You know, parents never forget their children, and children don't forget their parents, like you say.
Yeah.
And the Kaddish, they don't say you're dead. They're just feeling very sad.
But it's estrangement, and it's saying, and on some level they're saying, I don't want to think about you. But you know, they're saying that because I'm so connected, and we're so connected, and whatever. You're causing me some. Yeah, but the point is, the fact that your child can cause you so much pain that you have to block it out and say you're not here anymore. The fact that your child can cause you so much pain is because you're connected. right? So that itself, if somebody says something to you, you're not gonna react in this way. The fact that I say I'm never talking to you again and you're dead to me, what it's saying is that your behavior is causing me so much pain. What does that mean? It means that we're really, really connected. So there's no way to get out. The point is that part of this Passover Seder is saying that we're sitting together as a family, those who are present, those who are not present, those who feel connected, those who are apathetic, and those who are ignorant. But what we all have in common is we're all connected as a family, we're all connected to God, we're all connected to our heritage. And I hate to be the one to be the bearer of bad news. It's unconditional. So no, it doesn't matter what you do, you can't get out.
That's good news, not bad.
I know. I was just being provocative because that's part of the
You
whole
are being
purpose here.
What other strategies do you have for dealing with the Russia?
I think it depends on the age and it depends on the person. And you have to understand the question. Are they really saying we don't care? Or they're saying, I'm upset at you because A, B, and C, or I'm in an environment where I don't understand how I'm supposed to defend this, or you didn't give me the tools for every child that says it's like saying when a person comes home and says you're the worst parent, the first thing to do is don't freak out, right? In other words, it could be what Seth is saying. And in many cases, it's basically a call for give me the tools to be able to feel this and be able to explain this. And I think that it depends on the age and it depends on the person. I don't think there's a one answer, and I don't think you can achieve it in one night.
It could be a set of answers.
It could be a set of answers, and it could be also experience. Sometimes the answer is not intellectual; it's emotional. And in fact, you don't feel connected. Let's have dessert. Let's have chicken soup. Let's eat the matzah.
Maybe the parent doesn't know how to connect.
Maybe the parent doesn't know.
Maybe
And part of
they
this is let's do
understand.
things ritual. Let's do things that we've been doing for 3,000 years. Maybe it'll make you feel good, right? So I don't think the answer has to be given specifically at the Passover night. Maybe it's a whole year. But the point is, what am I conveying? You're conveying is it's unconditional.
You done?
And this is who you are, this is who we are. And we don't have to agree, we don't have to like everything about this, we don't have to, but it is unconditional. So I think that once you get to the specific strategy, it has to be tailored to the person, tailored to the question. How are they asking? Why are they asking? What's triggering them? What could we do too? So that takes a lot of understanding and insight. But the idea, the embrace, the emotional connection, that doesn't matter what you do, you'll always be connected. That is the bedrock. Without that, no answer that you'll say will even matter. Because it's not an intellectual point. It's a question, do I belong, or do I not feel I belong? That's the question.
Maybe that blunting of the teeth is sit there, listen,
And don't run away.
don't run away.
Yeah.
Listen to what I have to
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
Reserve your comments until
Yeah.
later.
And part of that is the fact that you, at the end of the Seder, even after he says, I don't belong, there are still 4 sons at the Seder. You didn't throw them out of your house. That itself shows that it doesn't matter what you're going to say. I'm still want to have lunch with you. I still want to have dinner with you. Right. So that itself, you're expressing that truth by the fact that the Seder is going on and you want their company.
Does Rashi comment on that verse?
But where's the Hashem Li? I have to look. Yeah.
No, I'll be back. I have a book for you.
Okay, Shikayach.
That's that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for joining. Sorry for going over time. Everyone should have a wonderful day.
No,
Wonderful
thank you,
Passover.
Rabbi. Thank you.
And thank you for all the good questions.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
and
Rabbi.
at least I'll speak for myself. I feel like we're all one big family and we all belong. And it's a pleasure
Not
always,
me.
as always. Seth, you too. Can't get out. Once you're
You
in the
can't
group,
get out. You can't get out.
There's no exit strategy. There's no exit strategy.
Even if I say cottage for you, you can't get out.
Can't get out. Okay. Wonderful day, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a great day.